In the 1960s, the sea provided work for many in the city of Aberdeen. Husbands and wives were separated for weeks on end as their men went off to fish or were sent overseas with the merchant navy. It was a way of life many got used to, while others did not. In 1963, the city witnessed a fatal love affair, possibly caused by these long absences, that ended with Scotland's last hanging. In 1963, Margaret Gaian was a young wife in her mid-20s. Her husband Thomas was in the merchant navy, so had long absences at sea. The couple had 2 children, a son born in September 1958 and another born in February 1961, but he was not Thomas's. The strain of family life and Thomas being away had a bearing on her request for a divorce in 1962, as the marriage was a far from happy one. Thomas refused. Margaret, who worked at the fish curing firm of J.R. Stephen, then began an affair with a young co-worker, 21-year-old Henry John Burnett, known as Harry, and moved in with him a few months later, at Skene Terrace in the city. She soon realised her lover had issues with jealousy, however. He was obsessed that she would leave him, as she had Thomas, and began locking her in the flat whenever he went out. This was the final straw, and when her husband returned to port, she met him and they agreed to give their marriage another go. She returned to Harry's on 31st May at 4 p.m. to collect her younger son, Keith, and told him she was leaving him. But she did not go alone. She took her friend, 66-year-old Georgina Katna, along for support. Harry exploded, screaming, "Margaret, Margaret, you're not going to leave me." He pulled a knife and held it to Margaret's throat and forced her inside the house. He closed the door before her friend could enter, so she was left outside hammering on it, pleading for him to let her go. Eventually, Harry ran out, passed Georgina, and ran off. Margaret was unharmed but badly shaken. The 2 of them fled back to Jackson Terrace, Margaret's marital home. But Harry, consumed with anger, jealousy, and in fear of losing his love, took things into his own hands. He went to his brother Frank's house in the Bridge of Dawn area, forced open the gun cabinet and stole a shotgun and ammunition, then arrived at Margaret and Thomas's home, where he forced his way inside. He shot Thomas at point-blank range in the face. He died instantly. He grabbed Margaret and forced her outside, and dragged her up a local lane. He still had the gun, and she, terrified, must have thought she was next. At the end of the lane on Seaforth Road was a petrol station, where a man, John Irvin, was filling his car with fuel. Still holding her, he pointed the gun at him and asked, "Is this your car, pal? I'll take it now." Irvin tried to stop him and tried to let down the tyres, but Burnett threatened to shoot him. He backed off. He bundled Margaret into the car and drove north, but by this time the police knew what was happening. They followed him. In the car, Harry asked Margaret to marry him, and she said yes. A few miles further on, he pulled over near Ellen and gave himself up to the police. He said, "It's me you want." He later confessed, "I gave him both barrels. He must be dead." The police noted that he did not look in his right mind. His eyes were staring out of his head. At his 2-day trial in July, Burnett's defence claimed insanity, but the jury did not accept this, and he was found guilty after just 25 minutes of deliberation. The presiding judge, Lord John Wheatley, donned the black cap, and he was sentenced to death. a large crowd of around 200 people gathered at Craiginsh's prison in the city on Thursday, 15th August 1963, where Burnett was executed at 8 a.m. by Harry Allen, one of the last official executioners in the UK, and his assistant, Samuel Plant. The last hanging before him in Aberdeen had occurred in 1891, but he will be remembered as the last man to be hanged in Scotland. It must be remembered that at the time, Scotland's attitudes were very different of those of today, especially in regards to mental health issues, and of course Margaret, who was a married woman who had had an affair. This was very much frowned upon. Even the Solicitor General Grieve spoke of the case as being sordid. Burnett's insanity plea was ignored, even though the psychiatrists brought in by the defence all agreed he was out of control and not in his right mind at the time of the killing. However, they were not properly briefed and were simply not prepared when the evidence was tested. One of the psychiatrists, Ian Lowett, also felt his work was being ridiculed in the court, stating, "I was completely torn to bits by the prosecution." Harry had had a troubled background and mental health difficulties. At his trial, his mother Matilda told the jury he had played truant from school. She also told them he had threatened his sister with a knife and had tried to take his life once when he and his then girlfriend had split up. At that point, the psychiatrist at the hospital where he had been seeking help had suggested he voluntarily admit himself to what was then known as an asylum. However, prevailing attitudes led to the guilty verdict. Right up to the last minute, people, including Burnett himself, thought he was going to be reprieved. The man who was tasked with organising the hanging, hiring the executioner, and ordering the scaffold to be erected was of a mind to sign the petition too. Both Burnett's family and members of Thomas Gaian's family sought the reprieve as well, but it did not come. After the sentence was passed, Margaret Gaian stated she still loved Harry and that she would still stand by him. "My heart is with Harry. People can talk, but I still love Harry." In the days before the hanging, he wrote to Margaret, explaining he did not kill her because he loved her. He said, "I could easily have done it if I had wanted to, but what they were saying in court was a load of rubbish about me being insane even at the time. I knew exactly what I was doing." The two were allowed to see each other one last time the day before the hanging for half an hour. Jean Gaian, the victim's mother, did not want Burnett to die for what he did, nor did she want revenge, stating, "His death won't bring my Tom back." The death penalty was suspended in 1965 and abolished 4 years later in the UK. Craiginsh's prison closed in January 2014, and Burnett's remains were removed from the unmarked grave within its grounds and taken to Aberdeen crematorium, where in a private ceremony they were cremated.